My name is Edith Tomlinson Oladele from the island of Antiguan Barbuda, and I'm the founder and president of the African Slavery Memorial Society, incorporated in Antigua and Barbuda.
My name is Radcliff Robbins. I am a veterinarian, but I have a significant and profound interest in cultural development, history, and education. I am a member of the African Slavery Memorial Society of Antigua and currently on a presentation of our national hero, King Court, Prince Class, led by Edith here at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London.
How did the African Slavery Memorial Society come about?
The African Slavery Memorial Society came about after my father told me sometime in 1966 that I had a great-great-grandmother who had been born in slavery, and that her name was Abigail. And it was the first time I was understanding that I had a connection with slavery, with a slave and with an African. And years passed, and I remember at that time saying to myself, how come we are so visible and yet we are invisible? I mean, you see us, we're walking in the street, we're working and everything, but there's nothing written about us. All you heard was about the English and the British and history and that sort of thing. And then I went into Cameroon as a missionary, and I worked among people who were descendants of slave traders in Cameroon. And I recognized that there was a connection that needed to be made. And so I came home. I worked there with one of the chiefs who was set up Memoir d'Afrique, Stories of Africa, to do with slavery there and to work towards reconciliation and reconnection with the diaspora. And I came home and I got that dreaded malaria disease that almost killed me. And in the time of recuperation, I began to think a lot about how slavery and colonialism had really divided the people of Africa and the Caribbean diaspora. And I decided to see what I could do to rectify that whole thing. And I recognized too that many academics were writing a lot about our culture, but what they were writing was not reaching to the people they were writing about. And I asked somebody about that. All this stuff that you're writing about us, how do we get access to it? Because we cannot afford to buy those books. And strangely enough, this person got annoyed with me and said, well, if you want the people to know it, write poetry or write plays or something like that. And I said, oh, you can do that to myself. And that is how actually the Prince Class presentation came about. I took the history and put it in a way that it could reach everybody. Because the first exhibition that I did was actually done on poster paper with felt pen for the school children. That's where it began. And then somebody suggested to me that I try to do it digitally. And that's how we came up with what was shown on Saturday night. I have a dream to make it even more than that, to incorporate music and dance and that sort of thing, to make it a really cultural and historical presentation that can go anywhere in the world.
So, given that this is now a society, you've touched on it a little bit, but what are your main projects of the society? What are your main objectives? What things do you want to put out there in order for the society to learn about their African heritage?
Okay, the vision that drives the society is that we should research, document, and preserve the history of the Africans who were enslaved in Antigua and Barbuda, who are our ancestors, and that it should be done in a significant way through a museum where we have everything in a place where people can come and learn and see and discuss and everything. And apart from the museum, we also have 3 other projects having to do with tracing a genealogy. We're helping people with that. And finding our African origins, our ancestral origins in Africa through the DNA tests. We are really pushing that a lot. And the preservation of our language. That is why you will notice that the presentation the other night had the Creole language, it had the history, it had the historical documents. I told you what it was about. And so we tried to cover within that presentation nearly all of the aspects of the Slavery Memorial Society.
Okay. So one of the most interesting things that came about when I watched the presentation was that you talked about the origins of where Antigans actually originate from in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the main cultural groups that Antigans actually came from when they were brought over as Africans to work on the plantations of Antigua?
Okay, between 1563 and 1863, there were 98,600 Africans, that is the official figure, brought into Antigua. And they were brought from 21 different ports along the West African coastline. But in all, the Moravian documents show that there were over 249 different people groups in Antigua, in the Moravian Church. There might have been more. On that document that gives the numbers or the figures of those who were brought to Antigua during those 300 years, you have about 29,000 coming from the Ghana region, Ashanti, Ewe, Ga-Adengbe persons who came in 29,000. The second largest group was from Bonny Island. That was 16,000. And between the Efik and the Igbo, there was another 13,000. So the Ashanti, Akan-speaking people were the largest group that was brought. But you have manifested in Antigua through the crafts and so on, words and so on, crafts that are showing us where people actually originate. So that is a piece of research that I'm engaged in at this time. Apart from encouraging people to do the DNA test, we're looking at the crafts and trying to pinpoint where these crafts came from.
So, I actually wanted to talk about this later, but since you've just touched on it, in today's society in Antigua, what can you see the African retention in? I know you talked on Saturday. One of the main things was about language, and also you talked about food. If someone has never been to Antigua before and is not aware, where would they see the African retention? What practices would they see it in?
Well, you see it in the food, the type of food that we eat. Edos, plantains, dasheen, the way we cook, dukana, as I showed the other night, pepper sauces, tea bushes, bush medicine. It is there in the music, although not as well structured as it used to be before, because now there's a lot of mix-up with a lot of other things. You can see it in the people. If, like me, you've traveled in Africa, you recognize the physical differences in the people. I mean, there are people in Antigua, I could take them and carry them to Cameroon, and nobody would ever know that they're not Cameroonians. And they're also practicing the same crafts that their people came here with 200-300 years ago. I asked one lady about some basket weaving that she was doing, some weaving, that palm weaving, and she said to me, my mother taught me, her mother taught her, her mother's mother taught her, and it has come down like that in our family. And 2 weeks before that, I had been traveling in Cameroon, and I saw a woman doing the identical work. and this lady was doing this thing. So the areas for research are very exciting, and they're there. And I would really like to see more people become involved in this kind of research, because it would help us a great deal to know more about ourselves and to understand how closely connected we really are to Africa, even though so many years have passed.
You see the retentions also in terms of the proverb, apart from the language, in the proverbs and wise sayings that are used, also in terms of what sometimes referred to as superstitious practices and stories, little stories or little behavioral practices that suggest, an African origin.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many different ways in which these retentions, show themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So you talked about language, and there was a particular verb that was connected to a particular tribe in Ghana. Could you expand a little bit about
the verb
that?
to be, just like in English, the verb to be is very important, and that is the word min, and it is used so easily that people hardly even realize that they're using it. Me min go, meaning that I went. Me min a dance, meaning that I was dancing. Me min dance, meaning that I danced. They're all the tenses. All the tenses are there in that one word min. I can't go through the whole thing now, but that one word min enables us to understand that our Creole is a language with a structure, an African grammatical structure, and we have vocabularies, and we have all the things that make us know that what we have is a language, and it is a language that was constructed by the Africans who came so that they could communicate among themselves, because they couldn't speak English, and many of them couldn't speak to themselves, so they formulated a language.
Do you think that the language itself is in danger because of the massive impact of tourism and having to adapt, as that's Antigua's main industry?
I don't think so, no. People speak their language. We speak our language when we don't want anybody to understand what we're saying. We speak our language. When we want to communicate and express ourselves fully, we speak our language. It is a language that's used in many homes, not all, but in many homes, among the school children. And it is a language that is recommended that it be standardized so that it can be used in business, in medicine, in government. That when people go in, and let's say you go to court, the lawyer is talking, the judge is talking, the person is there who is a Creole speaker. He doesn't understand what the judge is saying. He doesn't understand what the lawyer is saying. Now, the lawyer and the judge should really know that man's language. Also, you could have people who are interpreters within the court system who would help people to explain to them what the judges and the courts are saying and so on. So there are many, many areas. As a matter of fact, there was a conference of linguists in the Caribbean a few years ago, and these are some of the things that they recommended. And they recommended that a certain day in the year of October should be Heritage Language Day, Creole Language Day. But it has never really been done, and it is something that we are going to look at instituting at some stage. Definitely later this year we have plans, we have a project already put together to hold a conference for standardizing and looking more deeply at our language and so on. You see, because the Akan language is not the only one that has influenced us. We have Yoruba that's influenced us. We have Efik that has influenced us. So there are all of these other language patterns that we need to look at.
Okay. Just a last question centered around language. I read in the Jamaican Gleaner that Antigua, and I know amongst other Eastern Caribbean states as well, is currently involved in the Old Testament Creole project. Is that true?
Involved in what?
The Old Testament Creole project.
Oh, there was a conference in early January put on by Radcliff Bible translators, and they are looking at translating the Old Testament into Jamaican Creole. They already have the New Testament in Jamaican Creole, and so they wanted to do the Old Testament. And they asked persons who were involved in any way with preservation of the Creole to attend this conference. I was invited, and I attended because I have worked with Sumner Institute of Linguistics in doing some Bible translation of some Bible passages. And of course, as I said, it is part of the preservation of our history and culture of the society. And so they're looking at, throughout the islands, people who are interested in preserving their Creole in its usage and so on. Not everybody wants to do Bible translation, but they're encouraging it, because Acts chapter 2:20 says that when the Holy Spirit came, the people who were there heard the gospel in their own languages. And it has been found that when the gospel is preached in a person's own heart language, they're more receptive.
So since we're dealing with retention, is Carnival. And Carnival has become, well, for my travels from going across the Caribbean, because I've been to Grenada, Barbados, and Antigua, I understand that's only 3 out of many. However, I've realised that a lot of the carnivals are starting to look the same in terms of the costumes. So I wanted to ask, do you still feel there's an African retention in the Antiguan carnival itself, the modern day carnival?
I think so. In spite of the fact that the thrust, particularly among the younger persons, that is towards what is often referred to as bikini mass. In Antigua, there is a mass troupe called Revelers, which I think for the last 12 years have won, Band of the Year. And that is because they still retain the old mass costume building traditions. Having said that, though, Carnival as an expression of emancipation and of African culture and as a retention, in my personal view, is significantly under threat, because the old expressions of that retention that were present when, for example, I was a kid growing up, are not as present as they used to be. The John Bulls, the Highlanders, the clowns, the skelly hoppers and stuff of this sort. There has been attempts and ongoing attempts over the years to keep these elements alive, but I think that those attempts still need to be fortified. But I think it's present but not strongly developed, and I think we really need to make efforts to strengthen those kinds of retentions more.
Mm-hmm. I look at the carnival in a different light. I come from an older generation that knew when the week of Christmas was the week when the Africans came to town with their music, the drumming, the masquerades, when the people came from the countryside to see everything and have a lot of fun and come together and so on. It was a very, very special time in the life of Antigua. And when that was lost in the 1960s or so, 60s or 70s, when that was lost, I think we lost a big and very, very meaningful part of our culture. Because the first thing that happened that shocked everybody was that one of the jumbles, somebody set fire to him and he died. That was the first thing that happened. Somebody threw gasoline on him and he was burned to death. No jumble ever came out after that. That would have been around 1976 or so. And I remember as with a young child driving through and through St. John's looking for a jumble. And there was none there. And so since the carnival came in, which would have been in the early 60s, they have brought in other things, speaking of the skelly hoppers and so on, those came in later on. They were really not part of the cultural retentions that we had during December. And so since then, because really there has not been a proper understanding of the cultural retentions that had come down, like the Jumbles, nobody knew where they came from. I happen to know where the Highlanders came from. Then we had the Longus, which were the Nigerian Egungun. And what was the other one?
The still talkers.
The still talkers, which are everywhere. You find them all throughout West Africa, and they were quite prominent in Antigua at one time. Other than that, we're still struggling to find even a good photograph of a jambul and where they came from. So the society is really looking at what is actually being retained, because one thing I found out, and it's something that really needs a lot of discussion. People manufacture culture for tourism and to satisfy themselves, and I think that is what we're seeing with the carnivals today. You know, people trying to look like Brazil or like Trinidad and so on. So I think even the carnivals that we're having are losing their flavor because they're all becoming the same.
What I wanted to ask about is that many times they talk about rebellions in the Caribbean, and when people talk about the Caribbean, they tend to narrow it down to specific places. And one of the two rebellions that's normally mentioned is to do with Sam Sharp and also the Haitian Revolution. But just for people watching this, can you inform us of any rebellions that actually took place in Antigua?
Yes, the more significant rebellion, there had been at least one prior to this, but the one that had had the greatest impact is the 1736 rebellion led by Kincaid or Prince Class, where the stated objective at the time that the plot was unearthed was to make the population of Antigua, the enslaved peoples living in Antigua at that time, masters of the island. Kincaid came to Antigua, Prince Class, when he was a boy of about 10, and in my view was nurtured within the Akan community that existed on the island. And as a young man, by the time he was 30, he had developed a network, island-wide, of individuals who were his deputies, who were committed to the undertaking that they had set themselves to. They had planned to put gunpowder in the government house and blow it up with the planters who were enjoying themselves in order to achieve the aim of making themselves masters. However, the ball was postponed. And the postponement of the plot that had been 8 years in the making, in my view, led to great restlessness within the population. This restlessness was detected by the Justice of the Peace at the time, Arbuthnot, a gentleman by the name of Arbuthnot. And he very assiduously and very, very carefully led a detailed investigation throughout the island, trying to unearth the plot, and uncovered enough evidence which suggested to him that they were in mortal danger, to use his words. And as a result of this, they were able to discover the ringleaders of the plot, 88 in all, who were horribly executed, broken at the wheel, stretched at the rack, burnt at the stake, and beyond that, some of them were even banished.
Okay, all right. So, is there? If someone wanted to learn more about Prince Class, how could they go about doing it?
The most extensive record that I am aware of is the book Bondsmen and Rebels by Professor Barry Gaspar. I think that it's a fairly significant tome, but it gives an in-depth analysis, not just of the chronicle of the events, but the interpretation of them, and also the colonial records where the details can be found. It's a fairly, for me, interesting picture, because I believe that it also marks the advent of democracy in the Western Hemisphere. We tend to think of democracy as a European concept, especially coming out of the French Revolution, or earlier then, the French Revolution of 1804, 1796, if I remember correctly, and the American Revolution of 1776. But I find it fascinating to consider that when the idea of making the people of a particular geographical and political organization masters of their own island in 1736, in my view, it is the expression of the first democratic concept in this part of the world. And it is fascinating to consider that this is something that came out of Africa and was about to find realization in this part of the world.
Okay. There's just two more questions I want to ask about regarding rebellion. One thing is that many Antigans would have obviously heard of Prince Class.
Yes.
But why is there two names? Because some people say King Court, some people say Prince Class, and also on ABS News you obviously talked about the renaming of the street, so
yes.
the appropriate name, what you actually believe what the appropriate name should be. So why does he have two names, and why do you believe his name should be changed to what you call the appropriate name?
Okay, it is actually a bit more than, because his childhood name also is Taki. So, but the problem is that the first, I think, most of us came into an understanding of Prince Class is through the reports of, I think, an English woman, or at least English or Scottish, I'm not sure, Mrs. Lanahan, who wrote a book, Antigua and the Antigans. And in the book Antigua and the Antigans, she refers to the uprising led by Prince Class. Now, I have not seen, I am not an investigator in this regard, so I think it's a matter which is subject to its own review. But in the works of Professor Gaspar, he's referred to as King Court. Not only that, there was a ceremony described in the book also where he was able to bring nearly 200 men out onto the streets with spectators in a ceremony where he had his generals and others who were part of his plot sworn to secrecy and crowned him king. So there was a ceremony in which is actually recorded, in which he was crowned king. So because he was crowned king with the name of Court, and it is also stated in the records that he was known as Court, for that reason, there are many of us who believe that his formal name is King Court. However, the records also show that he was also called Taki.
Okay. He was from the Taki people, and there's a gentleman from the US who did some research and who said that his name, his given name is Kwaku Taki. And I am of the firm belief that at some stage we need to look at Prince Class's name and give him his correct Ashanti name, because he hated the name Class and he hated the name Court. And actually, I read somewhere quite recently that Class was a nickname given to those who were brought from Coromantine fort, because it was a Dutch fort, and the name Claus is a Dutch name, so it just, it went into class. And but he hated those names, and I think one of the things that we can really do to strengthen his legacy and make him feel good, if you want to say that, is to give him his correct name, which would be Kwaku Taki, but we have to investigate and make sure that we're giving the right name. Who knows, maybe on some document we may find something, so there's a lot of that still has to be done there.
This is not a question on the list, but I just wanted to ask, after this particular rebellion, did this change things for Antigans? Did it make anything better, or did it go back to normal afterwards in any way? Did the plantation, the slave masters, did they decide to treat Antigans differently? Because you see that when you read about post-rebellions, you tend to see that people are still enslaved, but their attitudes do change a bit in terms of how they're treating Africans. But that doesn't mean they're good people for changing their ways. That's not what I'm trying to say. But did anything change for Antigans at all?
I think it changed for the worse in many respects. The repression was frightening. If we put feeling to the documents that we have. I mean, it was 5 months of executions from October of 1736 to March of 1737. They paused briefly during the Christmas celebrations and continued the slaughter the first day of January of the upcoming year. So I think it made matters worse for the enslaved peoples of Antigua at that time. But more than that also, it forced a lot of the planters into absenteeism ownership. And one signal example is the royal family, Isaac Royal, of Royal's estate in Antigua. The Royals fled Antigua after that because one of their slaves, if I remember correctly, and I am not held to this, but so I won't call the name, but one of the slaves mentioned who was a deputy for Kincaid, was their slave. And as a result of that particular event, the Kincaid rebellion, they fled from Antigua, taking, of course, their economic assets, their money with them, and set up their estate in the United States instead. And the monies from the royal estate in Antigua funded their establishment in the United States and the establishment of their plantations in the United States. To the extent that, in the will of the royals, I think it was, Isaac Royal, in his will, he gave a portion of his estate and his money to fund the Harvard Law School. And so we see that even in that particular way, there's a connection between the monies made in Antigua to fund development and education in the United States.
Okay.
I have heard it used, but I'm not sufficiently informed of the origin to want to comment on it.
Okay.
It actually came from the slaves in St. Kitts who looked down on the Antiguans for snitching on Prince Class, and that so many men were hung. A Garrat is to be hung. That is why it was called, that's why they were called Garrats. Now, when I was about 8, I took my first trip to St. Kitts, and my stepfather said to me, go and play with those children there. So I went, and they said, where you come from? I said, Antigua. They said, oh, you're a Garrat. Boy, so fast. See, I find a lie. I tell him, no, I wasn't born in Antigua. I was born on a boat on the way to Antigua because they were ready to crucify me, calling me a Garrat. So it is a long-standing cultural thing. We Kittitians call Antiguans Garrats, and I guess it goes into St. Croix and so on, because nobody liked the fact that somebody had told about the rebellion. Nobody liked it.
Okay, so the last few questions is more, what was history for like? What was history like for you at school when you was growing up, and is there a difference today? And obviously our focus is on the African heritage. So did you learn much about your African heritage at school, and are they learning much about their African heritage now, today in Antigua?
I learned little to nothing about my African heritage in school. I learned little to nothing about what it means to be Antiguan and Barbudan in school. I learned nothing about myself as a transplanted African in the Caribbean, as an Antiguan citizen. Actually, my interest in this kind of project and this interest starts with my mother. My understanding of myself as a cultural individual and as a citizen started with her, and her knowledge of herself and of her culture and of her place in the world. She was not an educated woman in the terms of book education, but she was a highly intelligent woman and highly astute. And it is this absence of self-knowledge which actually led me on a path to Kincaid, which led me on a path to history, which led me on a path of discovering who an Antiguan and Barbudan actually is. And it's a very fascinating story. We have made our mark and left our stamp and imprint on this world in history, literature, sports, arts, and the works. But it is not known. There were many firsts which Antigua and Barbuda stand proud of, but it is not a history which is part of our general public knowledge. And I think it is important that it forms part of our general public knowledge, especially the fact that it is an integral part of our African identity.
Well, for me, I mentioned the other night in the presentation that I first heard about Prince Class when I was about 11. And I remember hearing that story and I said, hey, that's very interesting stuff there. I mean, these people wanted to be free and they were ready to kill these people to do this. It didn't succeed, but it was a good story for me to hear at that time. And it was not a story that was common knowledge either, because my teacher, who was a lady who was probably in her late 60s or 70s, she was a retired headmistress of the Moravian Teachers Training College, and she obviously knew this from hearing about it when she was younger herself. And she just passed it on to us that day. But I remember looking outside at High Street from where I was in school and saying, somebody not telling the truth here. I remember as an 11-year-old, I was between 11 and 13 thinking about that. Somebody not telling the truth here. And so we didn't have any history. What the history I learned was English history, Henry this, 1066 and the Battle of Agincourt and all those things, which I thought were thoroughly boring. And I dropped history, actually, and which is unfortunate because today I love history, you know. So we are really miseducating our children by not teaching them the history. And one of the reasons that I did this Prince Class thing was that I found that children, 17-year-old teenagers, middle-aged men, old men knew nothing about Prince Class. And that needed to be rectified.
Okay, so we'll come into it. And if Antiguans start learning about this material, what do you think it will do for young Antigans and young and old? What do you think it will do?
I think it's important that we not just learn the material, but we understand its impact. I think it will give a sense of pride, a sense of identity, and a sense of continuity. It also makes us understand that as a people, obstacles are to be fought and overcome more than anything else. That it is determination which brings success. That it is not the obstacle which should deter us, but our vision of what lies behind it and beyond it. And I think this is what, Prince Class Kincaid has done for us. It has shown us that of our value and of our self-worth, and that determination rides over all. Because even though they were unsuccessful in 1736, this is what now, 300-400 years later? And we're still talking about it. It is still motivating, it is still empowering, it is still telling us what it is that we can do and need to do. And for that reason, for me, the memory and the history and the legacy is extremely powerful.
We're talking about it more today than we did 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, when you spoke on Saturday, you said that at the moment, hopefully this will change, you're not really getting much support from the government. I just wanted to know if anyone sees this and they wish to support you, how can they get in contact with you?
Well, there is our email address, of course. Tostem, long is long, Tostem, ANU, emancipationstories@gmail.com. That's one email address. The second email is my own name with a dot between @gmail.com, edith.oladele@gmail.com. There's a Facebook page, and the website will shortly be up. The telephone for the society is 268, Antigua code, 773-1959. And that number is also on WhatsApp. It's also on WhatsApp. We will soon have our office, which is going to be opened in April. And so it will be easy to find us physically and to be in better communication with us. And of course, we have our bank accounts and everything if anybody wants to support financially. There's also that, so they can get in touch with about that. Want to add anything there?
No, I think this is a great start. I think that there is a lot to do. I think we are now reaching a generation who understands the force and the power and the direction that this kind of historical experience, stimulates. And I think it should be at the center, at least it is my view, that this kind of story, this kind of experience in all our islands, not just Antigua and Barbuda, should be at the center and at the core of our own social and national education. And I think Kincaid, Prince Class and his legacy should be at the core of Antiguan education, Antiguan and Barbudan education.
If I could just say something here, UNESCO has a school curriculum called Breaking the Chains, and it's been out since like 2000, 2004, somewhere around there. And it's in St. Kitts. It's in the schools in St. Kitts, but we just couldn't get it into the schools in Antigua. And quite a number of schools are beginning to use it in order to bring an African history component to the school curriculum. UNESCO has also published a volume of the general history of Africa, which is written by African and academics, historians and so on. Excellent material that takes you from, I can't remember where, but way back, coming right up to, I think, 1888. And so these are areas of information that we can use to educate ourselves and our children and our families, And as you said, there are many books around, lots of books that we just need to go into the bookshop or go on the internet and score it and find stuff. I found a book the other day that just made me so excited that I could find something like this. It's called Antera Duke, The Diary of Antera Duke, an African 18th century slave trader. He was an Efik man from southeastern Nigeria. And I found the name Antigua in that book on page 49. And they were telling you all these slaves are leaving this place, going out to Grenada. Every night the ships left full of people going out to Grenada. They were going to Jamaica. They were going to Antigua, all over. I mean, the books are there. You just have to search for them, We have to become detectives. That's what we have to do. Be always on the lookout for information. Some information is good, some information is not good. But be always on the lookout for information for ourselves. Because if we don't understand ourselves, somebody else will tell us who we are. And it's not going to be the truth. You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
So the first one, what's this one? A small place.
You want
Jamaica
mine?
Kincaid. Yeah.
A small place. Well, I haven't read Jamaica Kincaid's book, but I totally understand when she says that Antigua is a small place. It's small in size, and unfortunately, we're small in our thinking, because it does not allow us to explore ourselves properly. It's a very closed-in place, and we're hoping that through our society, it can become larger in its thinking, that our minds can be set free.
Okay, all right. I think that's Mary Thomas.
Yes. This is about Mary Thomas, known as Queen Mary of the St. Croix. She's one of the leaders of the riots that took place there. I find her to be a fairly astonishing woman. I learned of her actually very, very recently, and the fact of her Antiguan connection and the the rights that she led in the, at that time, Danish West Indies around 1788. Again, this is exactly what I mean when I say I was referring to her when I said that every single island in the Caribbean, whether it be Spanish, French, Dutch, or English, has individuals or had individuals there who have led the fight for freedom and the anti-slavery movement and for liberation. And I really think that it is these characters who should be at the center of our social and political education. If we had these individuals at the center of our social and political education, I do not think we would have any uncertainties at all about who we are and what we stand for. You want me to pass it back?
Yeah, you do it however you want to.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to influence you.
Okay,
I'm not
good.
allowed to.
Take one, and I'll take one more.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, sure. And then I'll disappear. I'll take one more.
Well, this look like it's supposed to be dukkana and saltfish.
Yes.
And
Choba and a salad at the side.
and some salad
Yes.
in a takeaway dish. What a pity. Because it don't look enticing at all. And you see, that is what happens when you make your culture ready-made. It just loses all of its flavor, you know? I don't know why you get this pale-up looking picture, because don't look at our food.
I think I have here now a picture of Devil's Bridge in Antigua. I must say I really like the name, but it's an interesting geographical formation where the wave action of the Atlantic has cut the limestone rock from underneath, leaving a stone bridge to cross over. It's fairly exciting place, can be a visually exciting and a physically exciting place to be. Also, it is the site of our annual kite flying, international exhibition, and I love making kites, and so I'll be there in a few weeks at the end of Easter to fly my kite from Devil's Bridge. Okay. I have in my hand a photograph of Natasha Lightfoot, Professor Dr. Natasha Lightfoot. She is a woman whom I can say safely publicly I'm totally in love with. Her scholarship, her sincerity, the depth of her analysis of our Antiguan historical situation just keeps me in awe that such a person, so young, can be so incisive, can be so thorough, can be so historical with meaning. Her work has influenced me a lot in my perception of the Antiguan and Barbudan experience. And I devour everything that she writes, and I attend every single function at which she speaks, because it is such an uplifting and inspiring experience. I think she's a gem and she's a treasure for us as Antiguans and Barbudans, and for the rest of the world who come into contact with her scholarship, her personality, her humanity, and her work.
Okay, well, I have three very interesting persons here. Dame Nellie Robinson, one of our national heroes. Is she a dame?
Yes. National hero of Antigua and Barbuda.
Gwen Tonge?
Gwen Tonge, yes.
Yes. And Tim Hector. Now, Miss Robert, that's the school I went to, began going to in 1947, January. And I was not terribly enamored of her, because the first thing that happened was that she beat me with this leather string called laddie. All right, all of us got beat with laddie the first day for making noise, so we were very afraid of her. But one thing I admired with her, she was always telling us a story of how, as a young girl of 18, she decided that the poor black children should go to have an education, because in those days, you're poor and you're black, you couldn't go to the Anglican high school and the grammar school and so on that easily. And so she set up this school not only for the black children but also for the Syrians who were there. And it was a school that taught a lot of civic pride and taught us how to be good women and men. Let me put it that way. I enjoyed my school days, even though I found that there was more I wanted to do at home that was being done in school. But I still enjoyed it, and it was one of the top schools, private schools in Antigua. And say something about Miss Rob. Miss Rob used to tell us that she does all her planning lying in her bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I understand that. And I don't know whether it is I've taken on what she has said or what, but it's the same thing with me. Maybe that's what thinking people do. After they've slept, they think. Now, Gwen Tonge was a family friend. Oh, look. You just were there? Was
No,
it?
it was there. You probably took it by accident.
Gwen Tonge was a family friend and a very close friend of my mother and of mine also. You know, she kind of mentored me with cooking and that sort of thing. Because teaching Gwen in the 60s, when we were going into the West Indies Federation, the home economic teachers who were trained in the Caribbean came together because they wanted to make the people of the West Indies the healthiest people. And so they really taught us how to cook our foods and cook them well and the nutritional values and so on. So Teacher Gwen did a lot in that respect, and I greatly admired her. Now you have a jumble. You're not such a good looking jumble, but anyway. My favorite masquerade that used to make us all laugh and run and cry if it got too near. I remember my first real close experience with a jumble was the day I got glasses on the 20th of December 1953. And as we came down from the cathedral, the jumble was on High Street, like a block away. And we ran into a friend's house and ran upstairs so we could look at the jumble from the bedrooms downstairs. Where's now Seco Pharmacy? We went up there. And, oh boy, the jumble was going up and down High Street. So we stayed until he went down High Street. And everybody began to come out. And I was the last person to come out. When I opened the front door, there was a jumble in front of me. Well, you know what happened? My bladder released. Right there on the welcome mat of this house. But I never forgot that jumble that day. And I was just lucky because down the road he had held somebody, this lady that was going on, cups to cups to cups to cups in her high heel shoes and her lipstick. He hold on her and kiss her right there on the wall. So, but you know, these jumbles you had Isaac, John, no, not John 3:16. Arthur 16, Arthur 16. You had Arthur Grabler, and I mean, these were riotous men that just they entertained us as well as they frightened us to death. Now, Tim Hector, one of my favorite people. I was in my 20s and so on, same amount of time like Radcliff and so on, when we were being radicalized in our thinking about ourselves as black people. And it is from Tim that I learned about Marcus Garvey and read Marcus Garvey. From him that I learned about African history and Antiguan history of a woman called Africa, that they brought out a special law to grab her in 1702, and how her obeah that she worked made some of the English soldiers fall into the gully and die, and how the British went after her, but they never caught her. They never caught her. Her name was Africa. And Tim wrote about all these things in her book, in his newspaper called Fan the Flame. And the SMS has been promised all of these documents to be part of our archive.
Oh, really?
So I really am very happy to say that Tim was my mentor, even without really speaking with each other. I just really have valued what he has offered to us as a people in Antigua and in the Caribbean.
I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I really could not leave without speaking about Tim Hector, the founder and leader of the Antigua Caribbean Liberation Movement. I think that I can say that he has become probably the most important person for me in my political life and in my life as a social citizen. The breadth of his knowledge, the depth of his understanding, his mastery of our trajectory as post-colonial peoples and as people of African descent was just superb. His understanding and his clarity was such that there was nothing that he spoke about or nothing that he explained that did not have the ring of truth and the ring of authority. And I think we have suffered such a loss for not having a person like this living among us at this point in time of our history. A wonderful and a marvelous individual.
Mm-hmm. Yes.